This is Kenny Loggins, and you're listening to Jazz Is Not What You Think.
Hi, I'm Michael Fagan, editor and publisher of Jazz's magazine, with a special podcast today on the one and only Kenny Loggins. Like many of you, I'm a big fan of Kenny's and his connection to jazz. I know it sounds far-fetched, but if you look at his discography and the musicians that played on his album, there's a long lineage of wonderful musicians that we know and love in the jazz world. He talks about these projects, his new book, and things that he's gone through in the music business over the last 50 years. Hello, Kenny.
I got peanut butter in my teeth.
I just wanted to make sure it wasn't a pot granola bar. After I read that part of your book, I thought it was, I thought maybe I should try some pot granola bars.
Yeah, it was an interest still high that night.
I know. The story was great, as were many of the stories in your book. To me, still all right. Obviously, you intended it to be a memoir, something very special, very personal, that you wanted to do for your fans, but it was pretty clear to me when I got to the end of the book, and I don't want to be a spoiler here, that you did it a lot for your kids, you know, Crosby, Cody, Bella, Lucas, and Hannah, and also their kids and their kids' kids. And it'll be something that the family will want to read for generations. I know I enjoyed it, and this is the first time we're ever meeting, so I know they're going to enjoy it. And to me, it was, and you could talk about this a little bit maybe, it was about the real Kenneth Clark Loggins. It wasn't all about Kenny Loggins, the superstar.
Well, yeah, I think that was the point, was, there's one thing for my kids who believe they already know me anyway. But for my grandkids who are going to ask them, what was Grandpa like? And they're all going to have different opinions. So I guess maybe this helps solidify that answer. And hopefully they'll have good shit to say about me.
I'm sure they will. So at the risk of sounding like the guy who comes up to you after a show and says, "Hey, Kenny, remember we met during a snowstorm in the supermarket in the cheese aisle?" We do have a little bit of a connection, and that is back in the early 90s, Jazziz was 10 years old. We had a long relationship with Sony, who they're the reason why Jazziz came with a CD inside. They wanted to launch this special technology that included a CD because they thought jazz fans would be the early adopters, and we included a CD in the magazine, and that became our model. But about 10 years later, I had my first child, and I decided I want to launch a magazine that deals with kids' entertainment. And the people at Sony got really excited, and they say, "Oh, you need to talk to this person at this division called Sony Wonder, Becky Mancuso."
Right.
And I said, "Oh, okay, that sounds interesting." And of course, because of Becky, you were featured in one of the first issues of what was called Play magazine with your son. I think it was it Luke?
It had to be Luke. He was about, where's the bottom hand? There. He was about this big.
And that Play magazine, we were kind of doing the same thing in a little bit different track, and that is, you were launching a genre in a category, and you even talked about this in the book, that didn't yet exist. And we were launching a magazine for a category that didn't yet exist. And yet it became one of your most successful albums.
Yeah. It's when I wrote Unimaginable Life, I predicted that Return to Pooh Corner would become the biggest record of my career because it's timeless. You know, it just keeps going around. Parents give it to other new parents, grandparents, of course, mom and dad will give it to their kids when they have a baby. And so it just keeps moving forward like that.
Yeah. Well, so I was an L&M fan, and actually I saw your final tour with L&M in it was Tampa Stadium in Florida. And I also saw your reunion tour 30-something years later.
Yeah.
But what really got me into Kenny Loggins was Celebrate Me Home. And Bob James and I have since become friends, but I didn't even know him back then. And what was amazing is you like to be associated, and correct me if I'm wrong, with the kind of smooth jazz camp. And
especially, especially when we were inventing whatever the hell we were doing.
Well, whatever the hell you were doing was very fascinating when I look at it from being a jazz guy, and that is, you selected some of the best contemporary jazz artists in the business who are also playing on albums like Joni Mitchell and Steely Dan, and they became the icons of smooth jazz, and they don't necessarily love to be categorized that way, but they're the best. And you found them before they were big.
It was it was a zeitgeist thing, right? There was something going around that, I mean, I discovered Bob James from Westchester Lady, was one of his cuts before Taxi. And then Phil Ramone, when I went to work with Phil in New York, Bob was the first guy he called to be sort of an MD through the project. And I'm not sure if I remember right whether Bob got co-production credits or not, but I think Phil had the production all wrapped up by that point. But Bob really was active with helping me work with the musicians that were the New York guys. At one point we had Steve Jordan on the drums, with Richard T on keyboards, Bob on the other keyboards, Eric Gale on guitar. Who am I forgetting? Who was on? Well, George Hawkins was on bass, and who I brought with me from the West Coast. And these were some of the main cats in New York. And Jordan was yet to become Steve Jordan. He was the kid on the drums who everybody thought was a hotshot.
Yeah.
And I kind of freaked him out that day and had a few ideas, a few suggestions about hi-hat patterns and stuff like that. In this B section, I want this. And apparently he'd come stoned to the session and couldn't retain anything I was telling him to play. So Richard T took him outside and gave him a lecture.
And those guys wound up on Bob's big albums, Touchdown, and those that came, for the next, remember Bob was titling those albums based on the alphabet. There was Bob James 1, 2, 3, 4, then Nickel, then Touchdown for 6 points, then Lucky 7, and Richard T and Eric Gale, they were on all those projects.
All the time, yeah. He loved to work with those guys, so he very much brought them in and turned me on to them. And then when we went west, Harvey Mason was on drums.
Yeah.
And Harvey was one of the jazz stalwarts of the West Coast.
And so Harvey was on your albums. Nathan East has been on your albums. Bob has been on your albums. And Lee Ritenour was on Celebrate Me Home. Lee and I became business partners and started a label in the Verve Group in the 90s.
Oh, wow.
Shows you what a connected little world we live in.
It's a small world. And, Sanborn, I finally got to use Sanborn. That was somebody I'd wanted to work with forever. And, of course, Everett Harp became one of my main guys, and he's had a few #1 jazz records.
And Mark Russo, right? I remember when you – I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just set up the Yellow Jackets.
Of the Yellow Jackets. I remember doing a photo session with the Yellow Jackets, and the only thing I remember about Mark is he didn't want to take off his shoes. But nonetheless, you became you became, because I've been in the record label business, I understand a little bit about the trials and tribulations of executives at record labels. And you were, being a true artist, a moving target. And sometimes that hurt. And yet you made the music you believed in. And one of the things that I've always believed, if the Beatles' first album was the White Album, a lot less people would have bought it. And yet you were able to explore so many different genres, and you're still exploring, which I find fascinating about an artist, because yes, you can do the old repertoire, but moving forward. So is there any creative area that you're looking to get into now that maybe you've not yet done?
What I'm looking at right now is how mentoring affects me creatively. And what I found is that when I attend these songwriters symposiums and things. And I'd initially ostensibly attend as a mentor and as a as a teacher. Once we really get into it, and I pull from some of the talent that's there, and we sit down and we have real writing sessions, I find myself writing in styles that I've never written in before. We had a gathering here. God, when was it? I guess it was early 2020, or maybe just before that all started, where one of the girls, forgive me because I can't remember her name, but she was an Israeli Puerto Rican. And she had the most interesting accent and most interesting melodic sense. And so when I was working with her, I was saying, well, what are your sources? And she said, well, I really love Sade. And I said, well, if you're going to do Sade, we have to start with a bass line. So we dig in and we create a bass line. And then so let's put some chords over that. And I'm working with, in those writing groups, they assign a producer, like a kid who's got Pro Tools and a pretty nifty computer. And so while we're writing ideas, he's recording everything, putting in drum grooves, putting in different accents. And so the writing process is a really different process for me now. It's much quicker. It's condensed. You're going with your instincts really fast. And I wrote in a style that was completely different from anything I've done before. And I really loved it. And I've done that a few times now. And I find myself being drawn into sort of a neo-soul direction, which kind of makes sense if you think of where the 80s and the smooth jazz thing we were doing has evolved to where soul has evolved to. It's pretty interesting. Anyway, it's fun to have that be a catalyst for creativity. And so I come in as an old hand. They accept the fact that I have old ways of thinking, like overdubs and, song form, verse, bridge, chorus. And isn't that cute? and then we go from there, and it's really fun to work with people who are open to the old ways, but I'm not stuck in that either.
Well, that's great. So is this artist that you're talking about, this singer, a project coming out anytime soon?
No, she was just exploring her writing and thinking about what direction she wants to go in. I wrote her name down. I've got it in my files, but I haven't really explored it. But the reason I brought it up was because you talk about changing and evolving and moving with the creativity. That's where I think that the point is, that's where the fun is. So for me, and what I tell my kids is, go where the fun is. Just keep letting that thing lead you.
You mentioned you emphasize that in the book, and at the end of the book, you talk about that. If you don't mind, let me go back to the very early beginning. I thought, and I think a lot of people thought, that you left L&M to become a rock star. But after reading your book, it's clear that that was not the case. And it's almost like, I don't want to say the accidental rock star, but you were in a situation where you had all this creativity that was being, as much music as you put out with L&M, you're kind of being held back because Jimmy liked running it the way he liked running it. Would that be accurate?
That's fair. And, Jimmy wouldn't argue with that. He likes to be in control. And that was my agreement when I first went into L&M is, teach me what you've got. I'm here to learn. And he did it. He was true to his word. But at a certain point, you go, well, I've kind of got that. I want more. I want to move on to other genres.
Yeah, and there was something you said in the book too about, and even as it related to Julia, once the guru in you, once you become the guru from the teacher, you're moving on.
You have no choice. And yeah. That it seems like all the significant relationships of my life have been teacher-student. When I looked at even my first marriage with Eva she was raised in Beverly Hills. And I had never had money. My family had never had money. And I was attracted to the way she liked to spend it.
Today's episode of Jazz Is Not What You Think is brought to you by the Jazziz Vinyl Club.
The Jazziz LPs are 180-gram color virgin vinyl, and they're sent to you every quarter. They're curated by our editors, selecting some of the best music out today. Go to jazziz.com, click on Join Vinyl Club, and start your membership to the Vinyl Club today. You'll be glad you did. Since you've been known to be the movie soundtrack hit maker, any plans to do that? Obviously, with Top Gun being the greatest movie of all time right now, there may be interest as everyone sees the movie and hears this song, maybe some people for the first time, although I doubt a song like that was that popular, no one's heard it before. Yeah. Any songs on the horizon for movies?
I'm open to the idea, but that requires quite a team. You know, you've got to have a movie, and the director's got to agree with the idea. And then they've got to think, instead of thinking for, let's get a brand new act that nobody's heard of for $1.98, they want to think of using an established writer. So all those things are out of my control. But yep. I'm totally open to the idea. I love the challenge.
Yeah, and I've gone back and listened to virtually all your albums. And one of the things that struck me that you talk about in the book, you're a generous man. I mean, I know a lot of artists who have recorded songs that weren't as generous with the credits as you have been over the years. When someone writes a song with you, had some small part in a song, the fact that you've included them on the business side of it is rare.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that now that you've recorded and written so many songs?
Well, if I choose to include someone as a writer, I just do it, and then let the lawyers figure it out. And that the most convoluted version of that is when I jumped in on Danger Zone, which Giorgio had already essentially written along with Tom Whitlock, and then when I went into the session with Tom to just get a sense of the song, I felt that it was too repetitive, and so I started changing chords, adding lyrics, messing with the bridge a little more, making it a fuller song. It was really basically Highway to the Danger Zone over and over and over again, which may have been just fine, but I had to throw my 2 cents in.
But not for Kenny Loggins.
No, well, originally the idea was, I talked to Giorgio, and I said, yeah, I have participated somewhat in this song. How do you want to handle it? And he said, well, I can't bring you in as a full collaborator because we're trying to get this particular Academy Award nomination, and it has to be the same exact writers on every song. And you have to have, I think it was 5 songs in the movie that had those same 2 writers. And he said, if I add your name to Danger Zone will not qualify as one of the songs. So I said, well, let's work it out as a publishing thing. So we had it figured out as a publishing thing. And then when he sold his publishing company, it all got scattered. Something wrong happened. And suddenly I wasn't included in any of it. And my business people did not notice that for like 13 years. So there was 13 years of income that was just ignored. And then finally, when I started assessing my publishing and thinking, well, maybe it's time to sell the publishing, I said, what if I got on Danger Zone? They said, well, you don't have anything on it. It's like, no. And so we had to go back retroactively based on a statute of limitations and try to pick up what was left off. But so that was the most mucked up of my collaborations. But
and then the other controversial one is obviously it's coming back in the news again is with Garth Brooks.
It's coming back in the news just because
I've seen it. I think it is because I think actually they quoted your book.
I went through legal deeply before we included that section in the book, and so it's all by Hoyle. So we'll see where that goes.
Yeah. So the other thing many things that I enjoyed about your book, but the one thing that I will never forget is you're saying that in the 50s you're old, in the 60s you're cool, and in the 70s you're an icon. And I ran that by one of my kids, and they were like, well, Dad, you're almost 70. I said, well,
No, you couldn't.
I don't even know if I got the first two right. But but it's interesting, and as a legacy act, if you would, do you feel like you're in a position now where maybe you can explore more than ever? Because to be in business, you go back on the road and do famous Kenny Loggins and Messina's tunes, and people show up.
Yeah, but I'm not sure I understand the question.
So not many people have the luxury of they can explore a bunch of new avenues, new music, because they know to make a living, to pay your bills, you can go back on the road and do the legacy thing.
Right.
But in the meantime, you can do things that other people can't take chances on because they don't have that to fall back on.
I think that's an illusion. I think that to not take a chance is the problem. If you think you can't take a chance, you've already boxed yourself in. If there's something that's pulling on you, if there's something that's calling to you, if you think, God, I wish I could write with so-and-so, or I wish I could move into this different kind of genre, you should probably give it a try. Because again, that's where the juice is. That's what excites you artistically. You're probably going to do better with that than with staying in a form that maybe you don't feel as excited about as you initially did. So that's my advice to whomever, particularly my kids.
Yeah, I think there was another great quote in the book, and I like quoting you because I wrote a bunch of them down. Doing nothing can be worse than doing the wrong thing.
What was
I
that?
don't know if you remember writing that, but that's pretty prolific.
Thank you. What was that in context with? Do you remember?
I think it had to do with taking chances.
Yeah.
The fact that you took chances, whether it was Unimaginable Life, whether it was children's music, whether it was creating this new category of music.
Yeah, you're being on the administration side of things. You understand how frustrating that is for a record company to not be able to define their artist as one particular genre, because they kept saying, would you just hold still for a minute? So especially when Footloose happened, could you just hold still here and be that guy for a while? And next thing I made was Voxy Mana, which was like more of a smooth jazz record again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the other person who, I guess, he was at Columbia at the time, he became my mentor in the jazz world, was Bruce Lundvall.
Yeah, Bruce.
Did you have a lot of dealing? I know that in the book you talk about how he tried to talk you out of the covers record.
Right. But
he came to see you personally to do that.
Yeah, and basically saying, we're not really gonna, we'll accept it, but we don't want it, which meant we're not going to promote it. So why are you making it? But Jimmy had his mind made up, and I went along with it because I was too young to know that there would be an option, that it was maybe not a good idea, But it was an important thing for me to learn.
Conversely, Clive Davis is known to be a pretty difficult exec. We all know the stories about Kelly Clarkson. You may have heard the story with Geno Vannelli.
No, I don't know.
So basically, Clive signed Geno to Arista and let Geno do his first record. And Geno told me the story and was in tears. And Clive says, I want you to come to New York. I want to talk to you about your next record. And Geno respectfully flies to New York, meets with Clive, and Clive said, I want you to listen to the tunes on your next record. And so he listened to the tunes and he said, well, Clive, I read my own music. What are these tunes? Well, they're the guys from Air Supply. And he says, Clive, I'm not singing Air Supply tunes. And they literally got into an argument, and that was the end of Geno at Arista, and for 10 years he was kind of out of the music business.
Wow. Yeah.
So you voted much better.
Yeah, I did, definitely.
Because
let
I
me,
think he was a meant.
but yeah, he let me have my head, so to speak, and I could make the kind of music that I wanted to. I had less of that kind of cooperation from Don Einer when Don took the helm at Columbia Records. But I don't blame him, because I mean, I hate to sound like whatever, but the truth is, I wrote him a long letter about why I had to make that children's album, because he was very concerned that I'd be sabotaging my own career. And I understand why, because there wasn't a lot of history in that. But the thing is, and I kept saying, don't you want to hear the music? You know, you have an opinion about what I'm making and you haven't heard any of it yet. And he was like, I don't want to hear about it. Well,
Yeah.
so it's going to sell a couple million, and you don't want a piece of that. But then Bobby Colomby explained to me something that I didn't realize, which is that just because it stayed on Sony Wonder, Donnie still had a piece of the record. But he did not accept it as a record delivered on the contract. So it's kind of like taking it both ways.
Well, you didn't mention that in the book. That's an interesting twist. Christopher Cross. When I heard Christopher Cross's album, his debut album, which we all loved,
Yeah.
first thing I thought of was Kenny Loggins.
Really?
Michael Amardian,
Yeah.
Michael McDonald,
Yeah.
your old pals who really you guys just make great music together.
Yeah. We appreciate each other's work, that's for sure.
And I know you did a tour, once with Christopher and someone else. It was triple build. I think you, Michael, McDonald, and Christopher.
Right. We did the Hollywood Bowl together.
Yeah.
And it worked really well.
And
there was a whole lot of yachting caps in the audience.
Yeah. Well, that's another thing I wanted to talk to you about. This so-called Yacht Rock, which I like to call shiplap. It's because it's a misnomer, don't you think?
Yacht Rock? Well, it wasn't intended to be a nomer at all, really. I think it was definitely gleaned from the YouTube series that was more of a parody of the music from that era, and then became sort of adopted as the name for a type of music.
Yeah, it's what's interesting about Yacht Rock is it's almost the same cast of characters, and anyone who tries to enter into that, it's almost like a club. They sound like I don't know, rip-offs of the original Yacht Rockers, and we're hearing. I hear it a lot.
Yeah, I don't know.
We Are the World.
Okay.
No, go ahead. Finish what you were going to say.
Well,
Sorry, Kenny.
That I've done a couple of radio where I host a radio hour for Yacht Rock stations, like for Apple or I'm blanking out. Yeah, Sirius FM.
Pandora.
XM, Sirius XM.
XM Sirius. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and what I noticed was what a closed club it is, and what a very white club it is. And I started saying, well, have you guys thought about doing a show that would tip a hat to the sources of what we were, sort of taking and moving into our own genres, like a lot of black stuff. And, Shaka Khan, for example, of course, Stevie Wonder, of course, any number of players who were sort of that part jazz. Well, George Benson did a little of it, part jazz, part pop. And I think it would be better to show that there was diversification coming into that area, but that I think it was really defined by that series on YouTube. That was really, they were pulling in Hall & Oates, and of course Michael and I, and even Jimmy Messina and Christopher Cross, and so that cast of characters became their cast of characters, but the music itself goes way beyond that.
Yeah, it's so I was going to ask you about We Are the World, because I know that you are highlighted in that session. But aside from that, you never worked with Quincy?
No, I never actually worked directly with Quincy.
Yeah, because he is, for me, he was a mentor of mine. He was very helpful in my early days in the music business, and I know he's been a mentor for many. But the story you tell about We Are the World, which I will not do a spoiler here, is also really great. I also love one of the other stories you talk about when you're playing a club, that the music is far different than the singer-songwriter ballads that you did even early in your career. And there were two women up in front of the stage, seemingly getting and grooving into the music, saying, "Get down, get down." But you didn't realize until the end, they were actually saying, "Please get down off the stage."
Get off the stage. Well, I'm still not sure which way it was, but it makes it better to keep it up in the air. Yeah, when I think about that and what my memory was, I got the feeling that they were into it.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty good at reading an audience, even though I was new at it back then.
Yeah. You talk a lot about pain. Generational pain was one of the phrases that you used, and how you overcame that. And in fact, spiritually, you talk about how during a solar eclipse, you had kind of an epiphany. The other thing that's somewhat related is how we're all connected. Tell us a little bit about that, because I found that, that personal side of you, that spiritual side of you, some of the most fascinating parts of the book.
Oh, thank you. I talked a lot to Jason, my co-writer, about that, how much to put in that. And I felt that it was really important that I also share those parts of myself, because it's a more complete picture of the human being. That the solar eclipse moment was not really, and I'm careful not to blame the shift in my consciousness on the solar eclipse, but it is an interesting coincidence. And that I had an epiphany during that time. I was healing from being addicted to benzodiazepams, Xanax in particular, and it was very difficult to get off of it. And the people at the hospital had described it as the enemy or the devil, that the addiction, will come and try and get you, which is kind of one way of looking at an addiction. I don't think it's a very healthy way to look at it, because what changed for me was when I was meditating during that solar eclipse, that I began to see that it was really just that part of me, that part of my brain that was addicted to this substance. And if I treated it as an ally and thought of it as a sick child of my own, it would be easier to deal with it. And in the process of meditating and talking to my brain as if it was a sick child, I got the sense that I could recruit it as an ally instead of constantly going, "I want my drug, I want my drug." It's like, no, we're not going to do that, but we're going to get well. And it changed everything.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, and I don't want to get too personal on myself, but I have a daughter who has been suffering from an autoimmune disease that affects the brain. And I can't tell you how absolutely right on you are about that, and that we don't understand the brain. We think we do as people and as neuroscientists and physicians, but there's so much that we don't know, that we have so much more control over than we think we have. And that really struck a chord with me, because I know that I experienced that firsthand. And I think people are beginning to see that now. And, even in your discussions about health and colonics and, this thing called the gut-brain axis that really people are just starting to understand about, there's this connectivity, again, that you continue to talk about in the book. That is something that is so important to understand. And the more we understand it, I think the better off we'll be.
Yeah, I have to agree with you, because it's really our illusion of disconnection that's causing so much pain in the world. And I think that mankind is on the precipice of either a change in consciousness or demise, and something's got to give. And so I think the reason why I've been getting so much information about the connection of mankind with the planet, not just with each other, which is a huge leap of faith right there, but to get that we're all connected as part of a life force. And that's what you were talking about with your daughter, is exactly that thing. It's that awareness that there's a life force that's running through us and connecting us all. And it has to be acknowledged and honored so that we can grow and, evolve.
Yeah. So I have this theory. I'll run it by you since you can say I'm crazy. That's okay.
I don't.
Everyone talks about how the ocean is healing. Why is the ocean healing? So most of our Earth is ocean. And the ocean is salt and living things, trillions and trillions of living things. And in fact, if we're all connected, the best conductor of electricity is actually water, especially salt water.
Yeah.
And maybe that's some form of connectivity that we just haven't yet come to understand.
We've been abusing it for so long. We think of it as a garbage disposal.
Right.
And it's far from that. It's the source of life. So, we've got a lot of learning to do.
A lot. Well, Kenny Loggins, the music innovator, so many genres: smooth jazz, children's music, movie music, yacht rock. Still All Right, your new book. I mean, I can't even tell you how much I loved it. It was just, I couldn't stop reading it.
Well, thank you.
And it's not that you're just all right. Your memoirs teach us a lot about life, faith, hope, without preaching. And that in the end, what I love about it is we're going to be all right. And your songs, like your book, cover a lot of ground on issues that we deal with as humans. And like the French promoter you mentioned in the book, I think it was a French promoter, said, "You're not only a legend, you're a myth." Thank you, Kenny.
Bye-bye.
Bye.